Hello, Tennessee Voices viewers and listeners. This is David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. Today, I have the pleasure of having as my guest Dr. Ming Wang, Harvard and MIT MD and PhD, and he's the co-founder of the nonprofit Common Ground Network. He has told his story about the escape from China's Cultural Revolution, coming with virtually nothing, and he has established himself as a businessman and someone who's involved in philanthropy and also civic engagement. Dr. Wang, how are you doing today?
Good, David. Thank you for your invitation.
It's such a pleasure to have you. And for the audience that doesn't know, could you talk to them about what the Common Ground Network is and why you created it?
Thank you, David. Again, it's an honor to be on your podcast. I know it's a very successful podcast, #1 USA Today. It's an honor. I've been very burdened and troubled by what's going on in this country, the unprecedented hyperpolarization of our nation, which manifests itself as we're increasingly fixated on our differences rather than appreciate what we have in common. Polarization also manifests itself on no longer care about the merit of issues such as this pandemic, which is a medical problem, only fixated on power alliances, making the political problem. So I realized that the only way to help us overcome the polarization, to bring this country together, is to encourage all of us to find the common ground. I think many of us do recognize the why. It's important to find the common ground so that we can move our country together to resolve the gridlocks. But what's lacking is how. How do we find the common ground? When we face with someone who has different opinion, political, religious, and everything, how do we begin that process? So with Dr. Rice Brooks, we have established a nonprofit organization called Common Ground Network. The focus of the organization is to study the methodologies from all the common ground champions, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and Lincoln, and people who have been able to, in their lives, face their challenges, find the common ground, be inspired by them, and distill the pearls methodologies so that we all can use now in 21st century to help us find the common ground. So the foundation is to study how to find the common ground.
And this is excellent timing. We're recording this conversation on November 6th. As of this date, and perhaps when this is published, we will know who next year's president will be. But how are you approaching conversations at a time when we're in a very polarized situation right now in the United States?
Yes. And first of all, why we are so polarized, and I think has to do with an alignment of multiple identities. Because each identities drive two persons, the difference in the identities drive two persons apart. And if you alignment the multiple identities, further drive the person very far apart, creating what we call mega identities. So that's the cause of polarization, but how do we overcome that? I think we need to employ common sense. At Common Ground Network, our nonprofit, we have established a method called Common Ground Seeking Steps. STEPS. S stands for start thinking about common ground. Ask ourselves why. Why I want to help find the common ground. And what's my reason? And the T stands for trade places. We need to learn how to speak in the language of listener, not the language of speaker. And the E stands for empathy. You know, that when we want to share our opinion, we tend to keep on talking, but empathy that tells us that we need to apply, for example, the SALT principle, SALT, advocated by Dr. Rice Brooks, which S stands for start a conversation, A stands for asking a question, L stands for listen, and T, and then and only then talk. And then P has to do with partnership, find friends who are also inspired with you to find the common ground. And final S in STEPS is putting to action, seeking common ground.
Well, thank you for your explanation about that. Certainly, people are having challenge empathizing with those who are different than they are. And as you talk about mega identity, I think we're in this point where people have sorted themselves, or some people have called it tribalism, other people have called it issues related to polarization and bubbles. Even in a place like Tennessee, where we saw the results were very different in Memphis and Nashville than they were in the rest of the state. How have you effectively been able to, over the years, not just now, but over the years, been able to connect with people who are so different in a state like Tennessee?
I have been, first of all, I'm very motivated. My why is as an immigrant who has come from a society where there was no freedom, come to America to have fun freedom. I came as a poor student with only $50 many years ago. I appreciate so much our freedom and liberty, but not just freedom, liberty, but also mutual respect, equality. So the way I have been able to done some work related to finding common ground over the decades is I will find specific, in many cases, I build a specific organization with its definition of common ground. For example, I co-founded 7 years ago an organization called Tennessee Immigrant and Minority Business Group, which David, you have served as our moderator in the past. Appreciate it. So that organization is from Hispanics, African American, Asian American businessmen and women. And the common ground for that organization is we're all citizens of this great country, America. We all love this country and we want to do well in our own business, and also we want to help America. And then I also built an organization called the Sight Restoration Foundation, gathering doctors from around the world with a mission to donate our service to help blind orphan children. In that case, the common ground is our aspiration joined together to donate our services to help the blind orphan children. And the third example is an organization that, David, you have been so kindly participating and help, is the 917 Society. Actually, I have the US Constitution prepared because this has to do with teach our future generations Americans recognize what made possible the freedom, liberty in America. You know, it's remarkable that we have the system that in so much parts of the world, even today, over 200 years later, we still don't have, the people still don't have freedom, liberty. But why it took root here? And it has to do with system, the check and balance, and the system that created, protected based on the US Constitution. And 917 Society, headed by Miss Joni Bryan, as you know, that has she had recruited you, recruited me, people who wants to find out what's the basis of freedom, liberty, especially teach our future generations America. So in the case of 917 Society, the common ground there is our common recognition and respect for our Constitution. So common ground applies as different settings to different group of people. At my own church, Bethel World Outreach, Pastor James and Pastor Rice Books, our common ground there, we have people from 7 different nations and one of the most culturally diverse church, but our common ground there is our love for Christ in that Christian church. So to answer your question, David, I find that common ground is not an empty statement. It has to apply to specific group of people with a specific definition of common ground, and for different groups, different definitions of common ground.
I appreciate you explaining that. And I would be curious about your thoughts on how to approach conflict, because we know that there's tension in conversations. What are some steps or tips that you might have for people if they don't know how to start such a conversation?
Yes. I would say I learned a few things in life, and I made many mistakes myself as well. But through my mistakes, I've learned many things in terms of how to begin. First of all, we ask ourselves why. It's always about why, what, and how. Why I want to do it, what should I do, and how should I do it? In terms of why, for me, is I'm always interested in learning, because none of us can say I know everything. So my viewpoints based on my life experience. So if I meet someone who has different viewpoint, that means he or she has different life experience. That means interacting with him or her, I'm going to learn something new. Guess from whom I'm going to learn the most? Is with someone who has very different views as me, because he or she, her life experience is very different from me. So that's my why, is a urge, a yearning to learn new things that I don't know. in terms of what to do in terms of finding common ground, I found that we need to recognize common ground is like an intersection in the traffic. You come to this section, you respect common set of rules, respect each other. And common ground is a cruise ship. Doesn't matter which country you come from. While you're on cruise ship, you respect common set of rules. And common ground is also a sports game. Doesn't matter you're white, black or Asian or Hispanics. When you put on a sports jersey, you are fighting for the same team, and the common ground there is for the team, mutual respect, common set of rules. So I began by looking for building a relationship. I recognize that I don't have to agree with someone everything to love someone. For example, if someone who has very different, say, political opinions, and the other day I did meet someone like that. I said, okay, let me ask you, do you like to play ping pong? Well, we end up both love to play ping pong. So that's our common ground. So common ground is whatever the overlap interests you're willing to be open-minded to identify, even with someone who are very different in many other worldviews, to identify the shared area of interest. And it's from there you begin the relationship and you can gradually expand. And the final thing I want to say is one thing I learned about common ground seeking process is that we do this common ground seeking and we develop the how by looking at relationship building. But sometimes, very often, I'm very pleasantly surprised because I meet someone and say, oh, I have nothing with you in common. No, because I don't know. My worldview is limited. His or hers is limited. When we come together, sometimes through a genuine, open mind, respectful, civil dialogue, sometimes we discover previous unknown area of interest. To me, common ground seeking is like between husband and wife. When you get together, they produce a third entity which does not exist before, which is the baby. So we need to be open-minded and we need to seek common ground in a genuine, open-minded, sincere, respectful way. We need to know why we want to seek common ground, what should we do in the seeking common ground, and how to seek common ground.
Thank you for that. And I want to interrupt the conversation for just a moment to ask you, as I do with all my guests, what are you doing, watching, reading to help you keep healthy and safe during this time?
Oh, well, I read many books. In fact, regarding our Common Ground Network organization, I've been reading as a clients Why We Are Polarized. I've been reading Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind. And also, I just want to show that my biography book, From Darkness to Sight, is being, as I mentioned to you earlier, that is being made into a major motion picture right now. It's called Sight. And the point of the book and the movie is I've been working with many movie producers and directors on this, is to help us realize that it doesn't matter what country you're from, religion, ethnicity, cultural origin, but if we all respect each other as human beings, we all have shared humanity on the spaceship Earth. So we really need to find a way to work together. So that's the point of the book, From Darkness to Sight, and it's also point of the movie that's been made out of my autobiography. The movie Sight, based on my autobiography, will come out next year.
And you are also a dancer and a musician as well. For the audience that doesn't know about these skills, tell us how you develop these skills. And I know we've had a chance to talk a little bit about this, but for those who don't know, how did you become to be a ballroom dancer and a musician?
I learned, I learned dancing initially during Cultural Revolution in China, where at age 14, I was kicked out of school because they would send away all the high school graduates to labor camps for life, stopping the school, closing all universities. So I learned the dancing at a time to try to avoid being sent away to labor camp, because if I could dance, I might be able to get into what they call communist song and dance propaganda troupe. So I can be allowed to stay in the cities and avoid being sent away to labor camp. Then eventually I escaped that. I came to this country as a poor student with only $50. And then at the Harvard Medical School, that I was studying first year, I gathered together with a bunch of students and we formed the Harvard and MIT ballroom dance team using my dancing background. But initially we were dead last because we were not good. And then we learn as men, that especially, that you just don't lead. You have to develop what we call the pre-lead. You have to be sensitive, you have to aware your partner, and you have to communicate, and you have to negotiate, compromise, form a joint plan, and dance together. So we improve, continue to improve as a team. The year I graduated, we won the U.S. National Collegiate Championship in ballroom dancing, and I was a member of that team. So since then, I kept on my ballroom dancing. And also I play the Chinese violin, erhu, E-R-H-U, and that's an instrument also I learned during Cultural Revolution to try to escape labor camp. Now I play that instrument to express my appreciation to this country, America, for freedom and liberty. Our foundation have an event once a year called the Eyeball to raise money to help people see. And because when you see the beautiful dancing, that reminds you how precious our sight is and how much we need to help those who, who have lost sight. So my music and dancing is fun, it's enjoyment, but also it's being put into good use for good causes.
Now, I want to ask you about some of your writing in the past. You wrote in the spring about a path to coming back and navigating through COVID-19. As a medical doctor, what type of advice and thoughts do you have on helping people navigate this? Because this is obviously going a lot longer than most people had hoped.
Yes, I have two advices. One is recognize the issue, and second is do the right thing. Recognize the issue is because let's ask ourselves why America, with the best healthcare system, have done by far the worst in COVID-19. We have 4% of the world's population, but we have 25% of death in the world from COVID-19. And I think the top reason that why we so unexpected done so poorly in controlling COVID-19 has to do with our polarization. We no longer recognize the issue itself, which is a medical issue. We only pay attention to power alliances. The politicization of otherwise a medical issue is the single most important reason why we have been so ineffective in dealing with virus, result in worst management COVID-19. So that's a very important recognition. That means go back to the fundamental, focus on the issue. It's a medical issue, it's not a political issue. Second, that my advice is to recognize that even though vaccine is being in development, which will become available in 2021, but even when becoming available in 2021, the effectiveness of this first generation COVID-19 vaccine is only about 50%. And then, of course, in many years to come, it will gradually improve to eventually reach about 60 to 70%. That's the ceiling of any viral vaccine. So why I pointed out 50%? Because the current protectiveness of just wearing mask, just wearing my mask, that is already at 50%. If only about 30, 40% Americans are wearing masks, if we increase tomorrow to 95%, instead of in the next 2 months, we're going to have another 200,000 deaths. We're going to cut that into half. So this is our vaccine. This is as good as vaccine, which will become available next year. Just put on the mask is equivalent to have the vaccine right now. So what to do? Wear masks. It's as effective as the first generation vaccine.
I appreciate you offering those words. And as we're coming to the conclusion of the conversation, again, to our audience, this is the Tennessee Voices podcast. We have Dr. Ming Wang, who is an author, medical doctor, businessman, and also the co-founder of the Common Ground Network. And before I let you go, I always love to ask my guests if they would leave us with some words of wisdom to help us get through this challenging time.
Yes, and regarding Common Ground, I want to tell that the logo of our organization is Common Ground Network, and it's a nonprofit organization, and the focus to study how we can find the common ground through our common ground seeking steps. I just want to leave one word is that we're living in a challenging world with pandemic. It seems that every piece of news is negative. But sometimes as in life, depends how you look at it, we should actively seek what's positive. What's the silver lining in this with such a very tragic death of human lives and loss of human lives and the suffering of economy and the jobs. And I think the silver lining is that perhaps that because in front of this virus, we truly realize that we are all the same. We are all vulnerable. Doesn't matter your race, ethnicity, culture, origin. So I hope through dealing with this challenge of the virus and the suffering, tragic suffering of human lives, the economy, and the collapse and the suffering, that can we perhaps realize that we as human beings, we truly are all vulnerable. We are all the same. We have the shared humanity on the spaceship Earth. We have no choice but to try to find a way to work together, to find the common ground.
Dr. Ming Wang, I want to thank you so much again for your time. May you stay well and healthy, and best of success to you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate being on your podcast.